Okay.
These are on D2L. These right here, I just added this weekend, but I'll put them up this afternoon. Okay.
There's a good picture in the book.
All right, so on the left one here, you can see the pulmonary trunk, and then this is the groove, the impression formed by the aorta. Okay. So as small as the zygos is, it forms a rather large impression on the lung. Okay, let's move ahead just a little bit to the muscles that are involved with pulmonary ventilation. So on Tuesday, when we talk of, we'll start with pulmonary ventilation, but breathing, respiration, has three components to it. Okay, we're getting oxygen to our blood. Tuesday we'll talk about one, pulmonary ventilation. Okay? That's just the air moving air into and out of the lungs. External respiration is the diffusion I was talking about, where oxygen moves out of the alveoli into the blood, and CO2 moves out of the blood into the alveoli. And then internal respiration is gas exchange at the tissues, still involving the blood, but instead of the alveoli, involving tissue cells. Right? So we're going to work with pulmonary ventilation. And I think I asked you to do this on Thursday. But if you just open your mouth, is there any airflow or movement? No. All right, so we have to change what causes air to move.
Pressure.
Exactly, pressure differences. Okay? So if I have a given volume with 10 gas molecules in there, okay, oxygen if you will, nitrogen doesn't matter. What happens to air pressure, which is the force of those gas molecules bouncing against each other and off of the wall, when I increase the volume? So I change the volume, I don't change the number of gas molecules,
It goes down.
the pressure goes down, provided I don't change temperature either. So they're moving around at the same speed, but because of the greater volume, they're less likely to bump into another gas molecule, less likely to bump against the side of the chamber, less likely to exert force. Okay? So pressure drops. So with that in mind then, if we want to decrease the pressure of our thoracic cavity, because it's a pressure gradient from the pressure out here to the pressure in our alveoli, I need to increase the volume of my thoracic cavity. And we use muscles to do so. All right? So the sets of muscles function is divided into muscles of inspiration, that's air moving into the lungs, and expiration, air moving out of the lungs. So for normal inspiration, we have two muscles. We have external intercostals. What would be the nerve that innervates the external intercostals? Yes. Intercostal nerve.
Catherine's on fire today.
I just guessed it.
Nobody got it this morning. All right. And the external intercostals are found, as their name indicates, between the ribs. Origin is the inferior border of the superior rib and the superior border of the inferior rib, so they're going in this direction. And when they contract, they lift the ribs up. Okay, so their function is to elevate the ribs. That increases, actually, the anterior-posterior diameter of the thoracic cavity. So it's like they're associated like this, and we lift them up slightly, there's more room this direction. All right? So this functions to increase anterior-posterior diameter. Not by much, we're talking millimeters here. The other muscle is the diaphragm. It has its origin off the lower ribs and the lumbar vertebra, and this kind of this dome-shaped muscle. Insertion is where? You are on fire. So not on the bone. Origin is lower ribs. Insertion is the central tendon. So when the diaphragm contracts, it flattens. That means that our superior-inferior diameter of the thoracic cavity is increased. What's the nerve for the diaphragm? Phrenic nerve. C3 through 5. And it's going to increase superior-inferior diameter. Okay? So now, open your mouth. No air movement.
Oh.
Now breathe in. So your ribs lift up, your diaphragm lowers. Now stop. Don't breathe out yet. Pressures are, okay, you can breathe. Pressures are the same, so they equilibrate. All right? So air is pushed by atmospheric pressure being higher than intrathoracic pressure. Air is pushed into the lungs until pressures are equal. Air is not going to flow out. You're not going to do expiration until what happens?
You breathe out.
What do we need to do? We need to decrease the volume of the thoracic cavity. So expiration normal expiration requires what muscles?
Internal muscle.
Good question.
Oh, it's just a relaxing of the diaphragm.
Passive. Relaxation. There's no contraction of muscles for normal expiration. It's passive, meaning relaxation of the inspiratory muscles is all that's required. Okay, so our respiratory muscles are only inspiratory muscles. Then we get to accessory muscles. So if we need additional force, we're say blowing up a balloon, or we're working out at 12,000 feet, and we need to take in a greater volume, we use these additional muscles. Where we change origin and insertion, so the scapula being insertion, the ribs become the insertion, and we have a greater force. Or we have, if we're blowing up a balloon, we have to use additional force, or on Thursday when we use our spirometer, then we pull the ribs down harder, push the diaphragm up more by compressing abdominal muscles, okay? Primarily rectus abdominis. One last thought. Are these muscles innervated by voluntary or involuntary nerves? Are the muscles skeletal or smooth? Skeletal. Are they innervated by voluntary or involuntary neurons? Voluntary only. The smooth muscles of your airways would be involuntary. But changing the volume of the thoracic cavity is voluntary neurons. So why? Can you fall asleep
And breathe still.
and still breathe?
Yeah.
What happens, let's say that I was in an accident, my spinal cord was severed, and I had lost the voluntary use of my lower limbs, and someone came along and did the knee-jerk reflex. Would that work?
Yeah.
Would I still kick out?
Oh, it's a reflex.
Yes, actually more than normal, because I wouldn't have my normal inhibitory reflexes either. Breathing is a reflex. Ever heard of the respiratory center in the medulla? Okay, so in response to changing factors, perceived carbon dioxide, hydrogen ions, and in the aorta oxygen molecules, voluntary neurons, phrenic nerve and internal intercostal and intercostal neurons are activated by sensory reflexes. So that during the day, even as you speak, your respiratory functions need to change, all right? While you're asleep, you're not thinking about it. We don't think about breathing during the day either, all right? Those reflexes are still in place. And you don't have to. You can stop breathing for a short period of time. Can you make your heart stop beating? You might slow it down, but you can't make it stop. You can't stop your stomach from undergoing peristalsis with food in it, okay? Those are smooth muscles. You can't stop glands from secreting. Glandular, that's autonomic control. These muscles are skeletal. And that's why you can voluntarily increase a breath, voluntarily stop breathing until the level of CO2 overrides and the reflex gets into gear. The control and the modification of that reflex is what we'll talk about in the very last lecture of this unit on regulation or control of respiration. Okay? But I don't want you to have the misconception that because you don't have to think about it, it's not a skeletal muscle. And so that's why drugs that affect skeletal muscles and cause paralysis. We talked a little bit about, I don't think it was, succinylcholine is a drug they use in surgeries to paralyze respiratory muscles so that people don't fight intubation and the anesthesiologist can take over the breathing. It's been used a couple of times, well, more than a couple, but it's been used in several murders. We talked about it with the case of the doctor in Florida. That first they thought was potassium. We had that as a case study in the morning group, but not in this group. And succinylcholine was thought to be the one in that where it paralyzes. It was a murder of the controller in Nevada a few years ago. Succinylcholine was discovered in her bloodstream, and her husband was charged and convicted. He was a former nurse. And it causes paralysis, and you die of suffocation. Because those muscles are, that's how polio, people that had polio had to be put in the iron lungs because their skeletal muscles lost the cell bodies of the anterior neurons of the phrenic nerves and the intercostal nerves. All right, so on Tuesday we will do pulmonary ventilation. We'll come back to this and review a little bit of the pressure changes required. Look at the gas concentrations that we find in atmospheric air and alveolar air, and solubilities, and how we move air into and out of the lungs. There is a lab quiz on Tuesday. It will cover the model structures, the larynx, muscles, nerves, and then on Thursday we have a histology quiz.
Okay, model structures, say that again, model structures.
So Thursday's quiz will be identifying
No, Tuesday. Model structures.
so yeah, like the pharynx, the parts of the pharynx, the internal, external nares, visceral pleura, parietal pleura, those types of things, growth structures that we can identify. So we'll have that towards the end of lab on Tuesday.
On the muscles too, from yesterday?
That we find on the models. Yeah. Okay. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?